Hi guys, here we are again. It's Miss Levy. We are in chapter 3 and we just finished talking about refugees and what a refugee is, the economic, political and cultural consequences for refugees. We talked about where we see refugees and why. We talked about some of the advantages, the economic effects of refugees on the receiving or host country. So next we're talking about connections to the demographic transition model. So when we talk about migration and how it connects to the demographic transition model, we're really talking about Zelinsky's migration transition theory, which consists of changes in a society comparable to those in the demographic transition. He says that within certain societies you'll see certain migration patterns, especially from one, so within the stages, countries of the stages of demographic transition model, you see migratory dynamics between them. So a society in stage 1, they are unlikely to migrate permanently. They do have high daily and seasonal mobility in search of food. According to his theory, societies in stages 3 and 4 are the destinations. So those are the destinations, or where people are traveling to, of the international migrants leaving the stage 2 countries in search of economic opportunities. So typically the way it works is if people from stage 2 countries, they are migrating to stage 3 or stage 4 countries, typically whichever one is closest to them, because most of the time they're migrating for economic reasons, and they are traveling on foot or primitive vehicle because they have no money. People from stage 3 countries like Mexico, if they're going to migrate, they'll migrate to stage 4 countries. And then internal migration within countries in stages 3 and 4, like the United States and, let's say, Brazil, the demographic transition tends to be intra-regional, so from cities to surrounding suburbs. And then next we have this graphic of the major global migration flows from 1500 to 1950. So you see up until the end of World War II, where we saw this major migration patterns. And again, we'll talk about later in the year, there are certain times or events in history that have been pivotal in shaping the modern political and economic layout of the world, and one of those most instrumental has been colonization. So you can see European migration here is the purple, and then the red, these are the migration by other peoples. Typically they were migrating, these people. So this is when you saw a lot of people leaving India, migrating to East Africa, migrating to South Africa. This has to also do with colonization to some extent, because like Britain had colonized India, and then people from India moved to South Africa and places in Central Africa where the British had also colonized. So you see that this is colonization from Europe to the Americas, colonization all over Africa, colonization throughout Southwest Asia, Latin America, Australia. Then you see these are going to be movements of other people. So this is how cultures spread. This is how language spreads, religion spreads, how people spread, typically through migration. Next, let's talk about the difference between a source and destination country and a core and periphery country. So source countries, those are the source of migration. That's the country that people are leaving from. Source countries tend to be stage 2 countries, sometimes stage 3 countries. Destination countries, those are the countries that they're traveling to. They tend to be stage 3 countries or stage 4 countries. Core and periphery, these correspond to development stage and demographic transition, and then also migration patterns. Source countries tend to be periphery countries. Periphery means they're on the outside, the outskirts. Periphery are LDCs. Periphery are stage 2 countries. So source countries tend to be stage 2, which tend to be LDCs, which tend to be periphery countries. Same thing, semi-periphery, these are stage 3 DCs, and core countries, these are stage 4 MDC tend to be destination countries. So periphery countries tend to migrate to the semi-periphery or to the core, whichever one is closest. Semi-periphery countries like Mexico, again, these are stage 3 countries, they tend to migrate to the core. Here we have this, you see this very much with this net out migration, net in migration. So the dark, the purplish and the dark, these have net in migration countries. The dark purple, the bluish here, these have net out migration, and then this light purple, they have really net migration of a 0. So the same number of people leaving as coming. And you see that often in these stage 3 countries, like Brazil. They have people moving, but they also have a lot of people coming in. You can see Mexico has net out migration, and United States has net in migration. This is a relationship dynamic that exists. This is an example of chain migration. This is an example of distance decay. This is also an example of core periphery model. As you see people migrating from Mexico to the United States. People coming from the semi-periphery, which is Mexico, into the core of the United States. You also see this from people coming from Asia into the west coast of the United States. That's chain migration. That's also core periphery model. People coming from semi-periphery countries of like China, or periphery countries which are stage 2 of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and coming to the west coast of the United States. Distance decay would also be people traveling from northern Africa into Europe. That's because people are more likely to travel to places that are closer to them. So that's why you'll see a much stronger migration pattern from northern Africa into Europe. Again, that would also be an example of core periphery model. Next, again, we see so many people from Asia, and they tend to travel and stay on the west coast of the United States. That's because that's where they initially just settled. They landed there and settled there. You see this as mainly chain migration. This is why you see so many strong ethnic communities of people from cultures and countries in Asia, and they are settled there on the west coast of the United States. Again, this would be an example of chain migration. This is chain migration as well. This is also chain migration. This would be distance decay, because you see that people are willing to travel shorter distances to get to a greater economic opportunity. So people from South America, Central America, Caribbean, Mexico, all trying to travel to the United States for better economic purposes. That's distance decay, because why don't they travel to Australia, or why don't they travel to Europe? That's because you see a greater number of people traveling from Mexico to the United States than you will be trying to migrate from Mexico to France, and that's because of distance decay, that people are willing to go travel, migrate distances that are closer to them. This is also core periphery model. This is also core periphery model. You see that, let's say from Philippines, that's stage 2 country, that's the periphery. They're going to the core, stage 4, MDC, the United States. Vietnam, this is the periphery, stage 2, LDC. They're traveling to the core, the United States. Here you have China, the semi-periphery, developing country, stage 3, traveling to the core of the United States. So this is also an example of core periphery. This is also an example of core periphery. You have the semi-periphery of Mexico and Colombia and Brazil and Peru. These are developing countries, semi-periphery, stage 3 countries, people traveling. You see less because they're semi-periphery. They're developing countries. You're going to see far less. And they have to go across oceans, so this is an environmental obstacle. Going to the United States. Going from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, this is from the periphery, the LDC, stage 2 countries traveling to the core of the United States. Let's talk about the migration to the U.S. by the region of origin. Remember, we took a look at this map, and we saw that for The migration to the United States has come really in 3 phases. First phase was before independence, so before 1776. Vast majority of people came from England, and then forced slavery out of Africa to work in plantations in the South. Then 19th century from Europe, and then more recently 21st century from Latin America and Asia. Please pause this and find these tree maps in your notes from Chapter 3, KSU 2. If you remember these tree maps in your notes, we talked about global migration patterns, those countries that have net out migration, net in migration, the United States and the Middle East. We talked about those countries that have net out migration. This means you have more people immigrating out than immigrating in, more people leaving than coming. These tend to be what we call source countries. They also tend to be stage 2, 3 sometimes, and they're usually traveling to stage 4. This is because of overpopulation problems. Remember, too many people and not enough resources. They need jobs and opportunities, so they travel from typically stage 2, the periphery. This is again the core periphery model too. They travel from the periphery, which is the stage 2, to the semi-periphery, which is stage 3, or to the core, which is stage 4, or what we call destination countries. They travel whichever one's closer because, again, they're traveling on foot. These are countries that are growing quite a lot because of their natural increase rate, high crude birth rates, but they're losing population from migration, so some evening out there in their population numbers. So you see these mainly in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and that's mainly because that's where you see those stage 2 and stage 3 countries. Next are those countries with net immigration. This means they have more people immigrating in than immigrating out, more people coming than going. These are destination countries. These are typically core countries in the core periphery model. So these are stage 4, sometimes stage 3 if they're coming from stage 2. These are countries that have stagnant negative population growth, and so they need people, workers, to come and fill low-skilled, low-pay jobs, especially in agriculture, like in farming, service jobs, in restaurants, and in housekeeping and hotels, landscaping company jobs, and also in construction and house building and such. So these are countries that have very low natural increase rates because of low crude birth rates, but they're gaining population through migration. You see these mainly in Anglo-America, Europe, Oceania, which is Australia, Japan, and South Korea. Stage 4, these are our core countries. Next, we talk about the United States. In the United States, we have the largest number of foreign-born people living in the United States, so the largest number of foreign-born people who are both legal and illegal, or what we call undocumented, living in the United States. The largest number in the history of the United States have come from Mexico. When we look at the Middle East, in the Middle East, they also have a significant migration pattern. And we're talking about the oil-producing countries in the Middle East. They have the highest percentage of immigrants. It's nearly half of the population that are living in the Middle East are mainly guest workers and those time contract workers we talked about in 3.3. United Arab Emirates alone, 90% of the people who are currently living there are immigrants. Remember, they're not citizens, they're immigrants. And they're there to perform low-skill, low-pay jobs, especially in oil and in construction. Next, we will talk about this United States immigration patterns, this tree map. So if you could find this tree map in your notes, I'm going to go over this. This is difficult to read as I took a picture of mine and uploaded it. So you're going to need to pause this in order to, because I'm actually going to start the next video. So when I start the next video, we will start on this slide about the United States immigration. Make sure you have that slide or that tree map available to you so you can follow along.